What up? What up? Welcome to the Sneaker History Podcast. My name's Nick Engvall. I got a special guest with me today and a special kind of event. People know about the Boktober type thing and the No Shave November and all these other things that people do for months at a time. But this friend of mine has been a member of the Discord, so if you're in the Discord, you know who he is. But he's been one of the most consistent people with the, I would say, dedication to a particular brand and not the brands that we're used to seeing, which is why I wanted to talk to him. As soon as I show you who he is on screen, you're going to know exactly why, because behind him you can see one of my favorite shoes, the Puma R698. Absolutely one of my favorite shoes, probably top 5, if not top 10, and arguably one of the most comfortable shoes ever made, in my opinion. But we could debate about that. Before we get into this conversation, I'm going to introduce Justin. You might know him as Justin Puma on Instagram. Justin, welcome to the show. How's it going, man?
Hey man, doing good. Thank you for that introduction. Good to see you today and sit down and chat a little bit. Just to introduce myself real quick, I'm Justin, Justin Puma on all the social media handles, and I'm just a guy who likes shoes and kind of drifted towards Puma. So sitting in a room full of Puma right now and ready to discuss Puma, talk a little bit about the history, and put the word out there.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I can't remember how long we've been following each other. You've been doing this for years, and I know we
Sure.
followed. I can never remember if I'm following people on my account or on the sneaker history account. So like I can't keep track of that stuff anymore. But I remember like it's probably a year ago or so. You posted like your room setup in the Discord, I think, right? And it was
Yeah,
like,
probably.
oh yeah, that's like, it was like, oh, we got to talk about that because as most people know, like I'm pretty diverse when it comes to collecting, and that's not necessarily like the way to go for most people. I would not suggest it because it becomes an issue of storage units and too many shoes and all of that stuff. But for me, like Puma's just one of these classic brands, right? And um, you know, being that I try to kind of bounce around and see what everybody's doing to make sure that for me it's like I want people to know that if I'm giving you my opinion on something, I've also had another pair on. I've held another pair in my hand. I've compared the two as much as possible. But what I really loved, like in seeing that was like you have a lot beyond just the sneakers too. Like, obviously people are seeing the stuff on the wall behind you. And honestly, it's like pretty rare. I know there's a few folks that are kind of connected to you on Instagram that I've seen through the years. But how did you end up, kind of, heading towards Puma in all of this? And like, I guess let's start before that. How did you get into sneakers first?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't have any really exciting stories or defining moments. Just like a lot of us, in our age, we grew up watching basketball and the popularity of Jordan, and then the rest of the stars, and then that kind of drifted into music and sports. You had Dion, you had Griffey, you had everyone, Agassi, and that really got a lot of us into sneakers. Sneakers were a big deal whenever we got dressed and went to school or whatnot. And like all of us, I wore a lot of brands through my life, even up until over a little over a decade ago. I had a variety of brands, a small collection of whatnot. But probably 15 years ago or so, I got a couple Pumas. Really enjoyed them, and I just kind of drifted towards those more than anything else. Social media started popping off, Instagram. It formed a community, and I just kind of like chose like if I'm gonna keep doing the sneaker thing, which isn't cheap by all means, I'm gonna stick to one brand. And lucky for me, I picked one that's a little bit cheaper than the rest. Um, but that that wasn't by design, but it worked out pretty good. I could afford to get a good bit of stuff, a good bit of collectibles too. Like you said, I have a room now that's dedicated towards Puma, and about 500 pairs of Puma these days, and artwork, skateboards, records, you name it, with a Puma logo. For some reason, I have it, and I couldn't even tell you why.
That is awesome though, man. I mean, that's one of the things too. Like Puma was such a huge part of hip hop, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm right at that cusp of like the age of like remembering, you know, Suede's, Clyde's, superstars, and that
Right.
like whole, that whole like mid to late '80s hip hop b-boy movement, right? And
Hmm.
then there's this like big jump once like Nike came into the picture, and Nike and Reebok are battling, and it shifted all of that away from like that kind of, I don't want to say like it's like an iconic, hip hop sound, right? But like so much of the style for that was focused on these like iconic shoes.
Hmm.
And it's interesting too because I think what I was excited to talk to you about, you mentioned like, having the collectibles and the records. That's something that I absolutely love about sneakers. I love finding the little quirky things where it's like a random keychain from 20 years ago that one of the brands
Exactly.
put out for an event, or I have a couple of records from like albums from, one was a Nike, one was like a it was like a I'm trying to think, it was like a collective DJ album, but it had a bunch of sneakers on it. It's in my storage and I'll have to dig it
Right.
out at some point to share in the Discord. But I mean, how do you go about finding that stuff with Puma? It's not like everybody's posting it to social the way you see it kind of with Nike or Jordan and some of these bigger brands, right?
Yeah, yeah. So some of the stuff, you can just kind of find eBay or your yard sale apps like Macari, Depop, that kind of thing. But to be honest with you, a lot of my stuff came from Puma employees or, really former employees. They worked with Puma for however long. They amassed this collection of cool stuff and, you know, it meant something to them because they worked with the brand or whatnot. But now they've gone somewhere else. They don't necessarily need hats, keychains,
Yeah.
magazines, basketballs and stuff with a brand that they don't work for anymore. And a lot of it was gifted to me. Like a lot of it I didn't even spend on. It was just, someone hit me up, said, "Hey, you got a crazy collection. I have something you might like. Let me ship it over your way." And I'm not going to argue with them. I'm going to offer them a few dollars. Sometimes they'll take it, sometimes they won't. But a lot of the stuff, just kind of was gifted along the way from employees, former employees, that kind of thing.
That's cool, man. Of that kind of stuff, what are the first couple of things that come to mind as your favorites?
Um, the records are real cool. Puma did a thing with the Miami hype scene, for a few years back in the early 2000s, where the DJs would meet up, whatever the name of that is. I should know, but I don't. And they
Yeah.
did, but they released like record sets, and most of it's music that we don't know, like I hadn't really heard of. But I was going through the records the other day. There was like a Diplo, and stuff like that. I was like, oh man, it's people we heard of. But I really enjoy those. I have the main things on the shelf, but I framed up a couple of them, put them on the wall.
Nice.
Um, I have like a Ricky Fowler sponsored by Puma. I have a
Yep. Yep.
hat that's this big. That's real
Amazing.
fun. Just stuff like that. I'm just looking around my room. I have lunch boxes. I have giant shoes. I have like this right here, this size 45 Clyde. This
Dang. That is
barely fits in the
crazy. Yeah.
barely fits in the screen there. Stuff like that. It's just really fun. I don't really have anything else that I can grab, but I really enjoy that kind of stuff. The artwork, a lot of it, I found people on social media who were making sneaker art or whatever, and I
Yeah.
kind of commissioned them to be like, "Yo, could you do such and such for me?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, what's your favorite pair? What's this? What's that?" And they kind of
Nice.
made the art for me. So I really enjoy the artwork as well. I had the artwork for years and years, and finally, we built a new house. I was like, I need a sneaker room, and finally got them framed up on the wall, and that was like years in the making. So,
Yeah, man. I've still got a collection that's waiting for that opportunity.
right,
I'm still in a tiny space, really. So, but one day, hopefully get all those tubes unpacked and framed up and stuff. That'll be
yeah.
the goal. Yeah. So like what's one of like your favorite kind of stories around how you got either a pair or one of these things? Like, I'm curious, how do you end up with the giant Ricky Fowler hat?
Well, the Ricky Fowler hat doesn't have a cool story. It was just on a website somewhere, one of the resale
Yeah.
apps. I made a bid or hit buy now. I don't know. I just thought it was cool. The giant Clyde that I just showed, that actually came from a guy who used to run a now closed, but a a Puma store. He was the manager of the Puma store, and
Nice.
you know, we kind of met on social media over the years, and I was like, I kept, probably for several years, I don't know, you ever get rid of that, let me know. You ever want to get rid of that, let me know.
Yeah.
And finally we made some kind of trade where I gave him a couple pairs of shoes, he gave me that. But now through the years, a lot of my collection, a lot of the pairs that people would consider grails, have come from his collection, his personal
Yeah.
collection to mine, whether it be through purchases, trades, or even gifts. So, those connections are really awesome. As far as pairs, people aren't really lining up for Puma. Maybe back in 2005, you had a couple of pairs that people would line up for,
Yeah.
but that's not really a thing. But back in, I want to say 2013, I took a trip to New York, and really we were just there for like a work thing. I wasn't there for anything sneaker related, but it was a All-Star weekend and for basketball, and the All-Star game was going to be in Madison Square Garden. So there was sneaker events just happened to be popping up everywhere. There was like I want to say it was a Packer and Reebok, maybe Packer and slash SNS and Reebok pop up. Shaq was there. There was that. There was a couple other things going on. But there was a pop up for A Life and Puma for a collection that was going to be coming out like a month later. But they had a pop up store kind of on the edge of Chinatown there.
Yep. Yep.
I'm a Southern boy. I live on the eastern coast on the border of Georgia and Florida, so I'm not familiar with New York. I'm not familiar with snow, the cold. Um, but it was February. A blizzard had hit recently. We were staying in the business district. Like I said, this pop up was on the edge of Chinatown. Being a Southern guy, I'm scared of the subway. I don't know what I'm doing in the snow. But
Yeah.
I got up
Yep.
that morning of the pop up and I walked. I don't know. I sound like an old man. I walked both ways in the snow. But I walked, blocks and blocks. It was 3 miles or so to
Yeah.
the pop up. The pop up was the event was supposed to start at noon, I think. And somehow I ended up there at like 9 in the morning because I didn't know how long it was going to take me. I didn't know
Yep.
what was going
Yep.
on. So they were still setting up the event. They were setting up the tables, putting the sneakers out. The food vendors were getting there. They were still plastering stuff on the walls. It was a pop up. It's not a permanent store. So I'm just kind of like sitting there in the door, like peeking in, and a couple of the workers and owners of A Life come over, like, "Hey, man, how can we help you?" Whatever. Introduced myself. We talked a little bit, and they're like, "All right, yeah. Well, what were you after?" And I was like, "Well, I just want the suede." Like, they. So this one is
Yeah.
the 20 years in running suede. It's kind of one of the first pairs that had the previously worn look. But the storytelling of A Life, they always have storytelling to go with it, and it's meant to look like it was war on the streets of New York for 20 years. But I was like, I just want the suede, and so the manager of the store goes, "All right." He kind of disappeared for I don't know a while. So I'm just sitting there chatting with other people, other employees, and he comes back and he's got this pair of suedes and the other suede. He's got like a goodie bag. He's got a
That's
T-shirt, the
awesome.
bag, and actually, let me grab the other shoe. I still have it, and a wristband. If you can see it, it says A Life Studios, the
Yeah.
wristband. The wristband was to get into a concert that night and the following night that featured members of Wu Tang. So
Wow.
Method Man, the Chef, so that was really cool to be able to be at that event, to be at that event before anyone else. I guess I could humbly brag I had the pair before anyone else too, because
Right? Yeah.
not
Yeah.
only did I get it from the pop up a month before release, but I was the first one at the event. So other than maybe some friends and family of the brands, I guess I was the first person to have it too. But that was one of my favorite stories. And then also that same New York trip, there was a event in Times Square, and it was for the Puma Ignite. If you remember those, it was
Yep.
a
Oh
big
yeah.
running shoe for a minute, and it was when those were first coming out. And there was an event in Times Square, and everybody was running on treadmills for a commercial with Usain Bolt. I showed up late for it, but I was still able to, see Usain Bolt, see the lights of Times Square with my favorite brand lit up everywhere, grab a T-shirt, grab a pair of shoes, from the vendor, kind of be like, "Oh, I didn't make it in time. Can I get whatever?" And they gave it away. So
That's
so
awesome,
that
man.
trip ended up being a Puma trip, even though it was supposed to be for like my wife's work. But
Yep.
I was still, what are we at? 8 years later or so, still one of my favorite times with the brand.
Totally, man. That's one of those things, like I think the sneaker thing, just working those kind of opportunities into your regular life is such
Right.
a shared story for all of us, right? It's like in a perfect world, it's like, yeah, sure, I got the money to just go to New York and experience this amazing thing. But
Right.
like when the stars align and you can actually be there for those things, like for me, like, it made me think of like, I can't remember. I think it was 2012 that I was in New York for All Star, but it was in Brooklyn. And we did a bunch of stuff with Adidas on the basketball side. At that time, I was working for Finish Line, and I was just like kind of reminiscent about that, because I'm definitely not cut out for the cold. Like I'm the older I get, the more I'm just like, honestly, just keep me at about 72 degrees, and
Right.
anything more or less than that, I'm just like, I don't need it. Um, but it's such a cool thing to be able to experience that too, because especially like not being in, not being in a big city like New York where you have just this like, it's like an epicenter for sneakers, and even me living in, you know, growing up in Sacramento and like living in LA and like being in, I lived in Detroit, I lived in Boulder, Colorado, and Austin, Texas. A lot of these places have like enough people where you would think that it's possible that sneakers becomes a thing, but when you get to see like and you go to those stores like in A Life that is just like a staple, like
Hmm.
for so many years they were like the voice of that corner of New York
They
City.
were.
And like they've done so much stuff throughout the years where you're just like, wow. And even the people that were there that have moved on and opened their own stores, it's just like there's so much of that like energy that moves around within the sneaker
Hmm.
world. That's such a cool thing to be a part of. And it's cool to hear that you got to do that too, because I think that's the thing. Like All Star Weekend can be so crazy, but like usually there's so much going on from all the brands that everybody can kind of find a unique thing to experience. And especially, like it's like I kind of land on the side of like if the brand that's like super popular at the moment is where everybody goes, like I want to go to like the other brands and see
Want to
what
go to
they're
the other
doing at
one?
that
Yeah.
moment, and like to be able to do that, like if you're, I don't know, I can't think of exactly what's coming out at that same time, but like if you're on the other side of that where you're like, oh, I'm going to this Adidas event or this Jordan event, you miss out on like the crazy experience of being able to sit there and just talk to those guys, have them be like,
Hmm.
yeah, we'll take care of you, give you this, whole package type of thing. It's just a cool thing for people to that are listening to remember too. Like it's not always about the, you know, I don't want to always pick on Travis Scott and Jordan Brand, but I feel like it's like we've done this so many times. Like let's look around and see. There's a lot of like dope people doing cool shit out there that we should be
Right.
paying attention
Right.
to,
And
and
that's the
that's a
other thing.
perfect example of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing I wanted to say about the events and the opportunities like that. It's not just about getting the pair of shoes. It's not just about the sneakers. Like you meet people, you form relationships, you form friendships. And, here we are 8 years later, and A Life's not really a thing anymore. But the guys from A Life are doing a new thing. Some of them have gone one direction. Some of them are running a skate store. Some of them with concepts. Some of them have started a new company, Newco, which promotes new companies in New
Yeah.
York, and formed relationships with them. So now when they do new things, you have opportunity to get into what they're doing now and support their new endeavors, whether it just be purchasing a T-shirt or, the guys from A Life, like I said, they started Nuco, who
Yeah.
did a whole bunch of collaborations with Puma through other brands, New York brands last year for the 50th anniversary of Clyde. And there was a handful of shoes, about 4 or 5 shoes, where they only made 73 pairs. And, forming those relationships, I was able to get the books they came out with. I was able to get those
Oh, that's
pairs that
awesome.
only a handful of people can get. So just forming those relationships and friendships, it really means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a sucker for books, man. Like the sneaker books for me are like probably more
Yeah.
important than the shoes at this point, because it's like that example is exactly it, right? These guys, the folks that worked at A Life have had a hand in so many other things, and like that's the case for every person that cares enough about this and has the passion for it, right? They get into it, they get the opportunity to do something in one place, but then it's like they're moving over here and doing this. And like we were talking about before we started recording, the people that move from brand to brand. And now it's like, okay, like how do we capture all the creativeness that happened, the
Hmm.
creativity that happened in those moments in these people's careers? And to me, like the books are like one of the only ways that we can really grasp that to
Yeah.
the full extent, right? Because with sneakers, like, the downside of it is like it's like just such consumer driven where like we're moving past it. We don't remember the stories. And, with sneaker history, that's what we've been trying to like slow it down a little bit maybe and like revisit some of the old stuff and like not necessarily like the same old stories either, which is, I think the algorithm driven, stories that are going to get the clicks. And it's like, I don't really care if only, half the people that follow or subscribe to the show see or hear it or listen or whatever. But like when people go looking for these types of things, hopefully they can find us and see like, hey, these guys are talking about a bunch of different things going on in the sneaker world as opposed to like just the things that have to, be spoken about to get the number of likes up or
Right,
whatever. And
yeah, yeah,
I think,
and not to gatekeep, but sometimes whenever I post things, or especially now that we've done this for years, it's not for the likes, it's not for the clicks, it's just for a few people, really.
yeah,
But
yep.
those few people are what is important to me, important to us, So
Yeah,
yeah.
totally, man. How do you go about on the sneaker side? How do you go about collecting? Are you one of those types of people that are only buy your own size, or is it kind of just like, hey, if it's something that's important enough, I'm gonna go after it?
I try to stick to my own size, but that's a huge window. I'm probably a true 10 and a half,
Yeah,
and my collection is probably a good bit 10 to 11. Probably in the most recent years, a lot of my collections swayed to the 11 just because it's easier to get, easier to find, a little bit cheaper sometimes on the resale prices. I might have a couple pairs and, of course, samples too, because
yeah,
samples only
yeah,
come in XYZ. But so I definitely have a handful of pairs that wouldn't necessarily fit me. But the majority of the pairs I get in my size because I tell myself I'm gonna wear them, I'm gonna put them on feet. Us old heads are big of put your shoes on feet, but a lot of it's also can end up being lies down the road when you have 500 pairs.
totally.
Who knows what I got? 100 pairs of dead stock that will never reach my feet, but at least I bought them in a size that I could put on my feet.
Yeah, I do that too, man. I have so many pairs where I'm just like, well, like I'm a 13, so like it's like the blessing and the curse, right? It's like
Right.
sometimes that's great because if people don't care about the shoe, it's going to go on sale and sometimes really cheap. On the other side, it's like the first of the
First one to
size run
sell
that
out.
might sell out too. So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, you have to kind of play that game. But it's one of those things too where I think you know, I I tend to go as close to my size as possible. I
Exactly.
probably only have, you know, I don't even know how many shoes I have, but I think I'm around 1,500 now,
Right.
and
That's crazy.
I'm probably have I probably have like less than a dozen or maybe 2 dozen that are not my size or not a
Hmm.
12 or a 13 because like for a long time I was getting 12s thinking I could squeeze and at this
Yeah,
point
that,
like I'm
that that
not wearing that
happens
kind
to
of
us,
stuff.
especially when it's something that's harder to get. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I can
Yeah,
go down half a
exactly.
size, and then before you know it, I can go down a size and a half. So
Right? Yeah, and I try to wear everything, but it's to your point. It's like once you have so many, you're just not gonna wear the stuff, and then like I put stuff on display. I've got the camera flipped around today, but like I put stuff on display in the room here, and some of the stuff I've worn so much that I can't wear it anymore, and some of the stuff it's like, oh, I didn't actually wear that shoe. I don't think like and I have a couple of pairs where I'm like probably just never gonna wear them because I really just wanted to have them to like have them as the art piece that they are.
exactly.
But it's an interesting kind of thought process. So I was curious how you looked at that. But
Yeah, yeah, and it can almost become criminal sometimes because we're sitting here with hundreds of shoes, and we might end up with like a week rotation. My sneaker room's upstairs, so I might have three or four pair that are downstairs because I wore them, and then I
yep,
might wear them over and over again for weeks, the same pair because
yeah,
it's there. I don't have to
yep,
go get something else. Where something else is sitting up in the room for 2, 3 years and hadn't been touched yet.
totally.
But
Me too, man.
what's accessible is accessible. So.
Yep. There was a time where I was, like I've pretty much had storage units most of my adult life for all of this stuff. And there was a time where I was doing the like weekly or every other week, like, okay, I'm gonna go get 20 pair and swap, like so I could rotate through as much as possible. Because I still like I've tried it probably 3 or 4 times, but I always wanted to do the like one pair a day. Trevor's been doing that in the Discord, and like I getting laid off and like all that's been going on in life, I just could not keep it up. But I still want to do that at some point because I just think it's a cool way of like documenting what I have.
Yes,
So
exactly.
maybe someday, but
It's something
yeah,
I've always wanted to do too, but it takes something almost like, which I know we're going to get into, but it takes almost like an event like the 30 Days of Puma Love to get me to set aside X amount of shoes and actually wear them one
yeah.
day, one the next day. It actually takes something to force me to do it, unfortunately. So,
Exactly though. Well, it's literally the thought I had when I saw you doing that. I was like, man, this is like the way that I could see myself doing it. So talk a little bit about that because obviously I want people to know about what you're doing.
yeah, so it's November. Forget about your no shave, no nut, no Nike November. Don't worry about that. In the Puma community, we're celebrating. This is the 11th year, I believe. 30 days of Puma love. So it's not something new. We're not ripping off Boktober. I don't know when it started. We're not ripping off the rest. This is the 11th year we've done this as a community. But hashtag 30 days of Puma love on Instagram or whatever other social media you have, but it's an opportunity for people, whether they have one pair or hundreds of pairs, to just share the brand. If you have a pair and can wear a different pair or display a different pair each day, sure, go ahead. But if you only have two or three pairs, sometime throughout the month of November, post it up, let everybody else who enjoys Puma see it, hashtag it, tag We Are Puma, so we can share it as well. And then that way we get the love of Puma out there. So I'm really proud that 11 years strong, and every year you see new people, you see new pairs, and you see a variety of styles. Because Puma, a lot of times people are just Puma or just suede Clyde. But once you get out here and you get a couple dozen collectors or a couple dozens just fans of the brand, you start seeing models and styles and pairs. Every year I see pairs I haven't seen before, and you would think
Yeah.
after a decade of doing this, you've seen it all. But no, there's stuff out there, and sometimes the month hits, and I'm like, man, I gotta go find this. I gotta go find this. More stuff I may not wear, but I wanted to admire closer. So
Totally, man. And it's crazy too because I feel like that's like the I'm totally biased, but I wish brands went down this path for themselves more frequently, right? Like I think what we're in this place where, and this is not me picking on Puma or Nike or any brand really, but just like we see all these brands take the easiest path, right? The path
mm-hmm.
of least resistance, and it's like, don't get me wrong, I probably have 30 or 40 pairs of suedes, Clyde suedes variations, right? I probably have I think I have like that OG R698. I probably have like 5 or 6 pairs of just that shoe alone because it is like I wore them, I swapped laces in them, and then I was like, I'm lazy, I'm just gonna swap laces in. I had round laces in one,
Right.
reflective round laces in one, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna throw white laces in. So like for a while there, I just had those 3 pairs that like I was just I wanted to wear a 698,
Just rotating
but
those.
I
Yeah.
would rotate through I'm wearing the same shoe, but I'm wearing 3 different shoes.
Somebody on 30 Days of Puma Love posted that pair today, and I had to message them and be like, "That's still my favorite pair of R698s." Like,
Yeah.
and one of my favorite pairs, period. But definitely
Yeah.
my favorite Trinomic, favorite 698.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and like people that are listening to this like can relate because like they're all sneakerheads and get it, right? But then I
right.
think I say that out loud and I'm like, like there's so many people in the world that would just be like, "What is wrong with you, Nick?" Like, but I've learned to try to embrace that as much as possible. But I think what
Exactly. Yeah.
what happens with the brands is like it's just the easiest thing for them to grab, and we see them, and I understand it, right? Because ultimately it comes down to a business decision, and
Right.
if the money can be made on a Puma suede, then it's totally okay. Like it needs to be a part of it. But I just wish that these kind of things like you're doing, would it seems like a great opportunity if you as a passionate collector of Pumas and like a fan of the brand can see new things every year after doing this for
Right.
11 years. That means the people that are working at the brands can absolutely see some new stuff to go back into the archives and kind of bring these stories back. And I hope that that's what happens from this. And hopefully, like just, for all of us as consumers, like I hope all the brands can kind of figure out a way to do these things and
Yeah,
kind of
they all
celebrate
got
their
such
heritage,
huge catalogs,
Yeah.
and they do bring back pairs and rotate them or celebrate anniversaries and bring them back. But they're I don't know. I don't want to badmouth anyone. Sometimes it's not consistent. Sometimes the pairs they're bringing out aren't necessarily what we want to see. But
Yeah.
it's all dollars and cents to them, and it's a business. And we're old heads. We're not the ones that are driving the buck and
Yep.
making Nike number one and Puma number three. So whatever's going to sell to where the money's at, that's what they're going to make. And we're lucky if every now and then they do a throwback for us or a anniversary and we can pick up some of our favorites again.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Totally. So outside of the, kind of, let's say like the suede and even some of the, I mean, honestly, like I feel like we could go down a whole rabbit hole here because we could talk about so many of the disc releases that are in the catalog that just never have come back. And
Right.
like they brought back the disc, I forget the name of the model, but it's like the high top basketball shoe that came out like 2-3 years ago now.
Weapon, the disc weapon.
The disc weapon,
Yeah.
yes. And like that shoe for me was something that I absolutely remember as a kid seeing and
Right.
thinking like, what is going on here? Because it's so far removed from like the rest of sneakers. And I think
Right.
Puma like has this like this moment that era. All the brands have an era like this, right? Reebok with the pump, and everybody's like, I'm going to take it one step further in a different direction. But with Puma, I feel like it's been so few and far between that we actually get back to these. Where like I know it's expensive to recreate the disc compared to the rest of the line, right? But are there any others when you're thinking about that you're like, oh, this is something that I would love to see come back?
Um, yeah, and it is kind of a cycle. The disc being a trinomic, there's a handful of other trinomic and even prior models prior to the trinomic early 90s models that, I'd love to see them bring back. They brought back the Mirage, a
Yeah,
runner, but there's another handful of runners that are similar, us. We'll look at a pair and be nuanced. We'll be like, oh, this panel's this panel's that. So, you could release a
yeah,
pair with one panel different and I'd be excited because I'd be like, oh, now it's a, whatever.
yep, totally.
You know, like in the 90s, they literally had a Mirage and a Mileage. They changed one letter in the name, changed a couple panels, but like once I got in the '90s runners, I had to have them both. I had to
Yeah,
go get them.
yep, yep,
But you got that, you got the trinomic stuff. What I've been sharing during 30 Days of Puma Love, um, is I get a lot of grief from it from the traditionalists, but I've been posting Puma cells.
yeah. You've been posting
Puma
some really
cells
cool
came
stuff.
out, with the boom of technology and the boom of we're going to show the air units after after Nike, after Air Max and whatnot. So they came out originally in '98. Some of the models that I'm showcasing this month are actual pairs from '98, '99, early 2000s. But also they did retro several models in 2018. The Endura, the Venom, a couple of those models they retro, but I got a handful of models that every time when I post them, I just like ran. I don't normally tag certain people, but when I post these certain pairs, I'll start tagging people I know who are designers or whatnot. Like kind of
Yeah,
like take the hint. I need this pair to come back. I need this model. So
yeah,
I'll definitely be doing that this month as well. Today I posted I had on foot and I posted the Puma Cell XC. This pair was actually
yeah.
1999 and I just laced them up yesterday. So 1999, and they were dead stock until yesterday, and then I wore them for 4 or 5 hours a day. But this
That's
is
awesome, man.
hands down one of my favorite Puma models ever, and along with what came after it, the XC2, XC3, real original names, but slight variations of the model. But
Yeah,
that's one
man.
of the ones that I'd love for something like that to come back. Um, and and they see some success with stuff like that.
Yeah,
The Puma in Hell was a
yeah.
pair
Good example.
early
Yep.
early 2000s, 2001 it came out. I have some pairs from them, the actual releases from back then. And then 2018, 2019 they did it again. was kind of flopped 2018, 2019. But here we are just a few years later. ASAP Rocky signed with the F1 line, and they're huge. They're selling out like a new
Yeah.
pair every month, and they're selling out. I don't have any of the new pairs. They just go too quick, and I'm not paying $120 for them. But
Yep.
but
Yep.
so it's cool that sometimes it'll hit, sometimes it'll miss, but they have a huge catalog to go back in, and like I said, I could throw pairs at them all day long. I'd like to see whether or not they actually sell to the masses. I don't know, but
Yeah, that's always the big question mark, right? Like maybe it's only been maybe like 2 years. I can't remember exactly when it came out, but like they brought back the Prevail, right?
yeah.
And that shoe is super dope to me. A shoe I remember from back in the day,
Hmm.
and it was one of those shoes where I was like, I can't justify paying the full price of it. And if I can't justify it, how is it gonna do? And eventually, like I got them on sale. I got a couple pair on sale,
Yeah,
because it's like,
now they're floating around for $30, and
yeah, exactly.
but
And
they're
it's
but they're
like it's
still
a
pretty
great
popular.
shoe.
Like, well, they're
Yeah,
popular among Puma collectors. Obviously, they weren't popular for the mass general public, or they'd still be selling them for $150 a
yeah.
pop. But
And
yeah,
it makes me wonder too, like, to your point with the ASAP Rocky and the F1 stuff, right? Like Puma's got this kind of unique brand position where they're so connected to motorsport. They
right.
bringing back the Speed Cats and that, and it's like, as a guy who's been into cars and sneakers all my life, like that's an interesting crossover point that I like. Sneakerheads, I can't see sneakerheads wearing the Speed Cat as like a casual shoe, but I know like it's popular, it's clearly super popular in Europe. It's a very like European style, as we would
Yeah,
call
it's
it,
a fashion heavy, fashion
but it's cool
trending
to see,
shoe. But
like
yeah,
you said, with ASAP Rocky. I'm wondering like if they expand that, do you think like there's like a chance that some of these other like, what I would say are iconic, not just the trinomic stuff, but like obviously, you can go down like any of these rabbit holes with the cell stuff, the disc stuff. Even, like they've had a few, like high level collabs, but it feels like it's been a while since they've had like a really like significant collaboration where people were like outside of the ASAP Rocky stuff. And I'm wondering if like if there's a world in which like they say, "Oh, this stuff with ASAP Rocky has done so well, we're going to now shift him over and like connect him to some of this other legacy stuff." Is that a good thing or bad thing? Like I don't know. Like
I think it happens a decent amount. I think they'll different brands, Puma, and in general, will do something that hits. I have a heavy Yo MTV Raps Puma
yeah,
collection, and their
yeah,
first couple releases were so big, they were booming. But what happened for the next 2 years is they threw MTV on everything,
yeah,
and
yep,
now it's cool to get because they kind of disappeared. Even the ones that were basically general releases, easy to get at the time, maybe on cheaper models. They were easy to get back then. And now that we're, 10, 15 years removed, they're hard to get. So they're cool to go back and then source them again. But, sometimes something hits and then they just water it down. Um,
yeah,
like we were just talking about the Inhales, and I think just earlier this week, last week, they announced 18 more colorways. So something hits and then it kind of gets watered down. Are all 18 of these colorways going to continue to sell out? Probably not. They were really. It kind of happened when the basketball line first came out too.
yep, yep,
Things were really hitting, and then it was a new colorway every week, and now it's still doing great. And like I said, it's got them to the number three, in the shoe category behind Nike and Adidas. But I don't know, things get watered down. So like as much as
yeah,
we'd like to see the crossover and then the next model and the next model, I'm the kind I'm going to buy every single model. I like a variety,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm going to enjoy it. But whether or not it will continue to appeal, it's hard to say.
yep, yeah. It's interesting. I totally understand it from the brand's perspective and being on that side of things.
Got to strike
In
while the
my career,
iron's
it's like,
hot.
yeah, if people are buying, make more of it. And
Hmm.
we kind of see that all over sneakers, right? We see it in the, Unfortunately for a lot of people, like the Panda Dunk, just became like, oh, everybody's buying this, so make more. The
Let's make more.
Adidas Samba, same thing, where it's
Yeah,
like everybody's buying like these basic colors, and I think that ebb and flow is always an interesting thing to see as a person that works in the industry. But then on the flip side of that, those are the kind of things that also make for collectors exactly what you said. It's like the MTV branded stuff becomes really interesting, where like you're going to go back to it in a couple of years, even with this stuff that's coming out now. You're going to 2 or 3 years from now, you're going to be seeing them floating around on either discount retailers
right.
or resale sites for a third of the price or less. And that's where like I love picking up stuff like that, because it's like this is a moment where we're going to look back at it 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and be like, yeah, remember when this happened? Yeah, nobody cared about these and they all disappeared, but now here's a fresh pair to look at
Yeah.
again.
And
And
the Sambas, I got a 16-year-old daughter, high schoolers, they'll tell you what's cool and what's not, and they'll
yep,
decide who's going to make money and who's not. And
absolutely.
Sambas, there's a bunch of beautiful pairs out right now. I mean, there really are.
Yeah.
This colorway, they're really great. But all they want the white and black and the black and white. They don't even care about the other colorways, and that's what's going to continue to make money.
Yeah,
Their brands are going to keep throwing collabs out here, and the collabs are only going to get bought by the sneakerheads and the collectors.
totally.
The people really spending money on, they still just want the basics.
Yep, yep. Yeah. So I got to ask you, before we wrap up, I got to ask a couple more questions. One, you posted within the last few weeks, you posted a pretty old pair. So I was wondering what the oldest pair that you have in your collection is, and how you look at that and go about it. And when you get those old pairs, do you wear them? Is it something you're like, oh, I'm gonna kind of preserve this? Because I think we're in a place where, as much as like I like wearing this stuff, I'm also feeling like almost obligated to kind of like
Right.
preserve some of these shoes. And
Sure.
I'm wondering how you look at that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll share my actual oldest. I have a handful of pairs from the '90s. I really like the '90s runners. I have a
Yeah,
couple pairs of released in '90s Trinomics. We already talked about the late '90s cells, and most of those I will wear if they're wearable. If you see crumble or signs that they're going to fall apart, you kind of got to stop. I've
yeah,
destroyed plenty of pairs, and I have got to the point where some of them, if you're getting them now and you haven't had them for a while, you can tell as soon as you get them if they're going to last or not. So if they look like they're going to fall apart, I'm not going to wear them. Like you said, sometimes you almost feel like a curator at a museum. Like it's your job to protect it for the next generation. Whether or not the next generation is going to care, who knows? But like it feels like you're obligated to preserve it. But if it looks wearable and it can be worn, I'll wear it. I probably won't wear it an 8 hour day, a 10 hour day. I probably
yeah.
won't wear it to the mall and have my soul fall off while I'm going down the escalator. Um, but
Right.
I'll wear it around the house. I'll wear it if it's just a short trip, to town. Um, but then beyond the '90s, I really don't have a lot of stuff going further back. Like the '90s, I have a good bit. I have a few handfuls of different models and whatnot. I might have one or two pairs in the '80s, but my actual oldest pair is a made in the '70s Puma Clyde, and I'll show it there. And
Yeah.
this isn't your normal Puma Clyde. I found this pair. It's not my size. I knew it was old just when I saw it listed, and
Yeah.
it was listed for dirt cheap. So I was like, well, I'm gonna pick that up. It's obviously a '70s pair, and even if I can't wear it or I decide I don't want it, I can sell it for a couple $100 because it's dirt cheap right now. But before I even got it, I started looking at the listing, and if you'd have to go back, and I could do a whole nother podcast about the history of the Puma Clyde.
Yeah.
But Puma Clydes in the '70s were not leather. This is a leather pair, and it is stamped, Clyde. It's got the Clyde signature on it. So before I even got it, I like screenshotted some pictures and I was sending them to some of the Puma collectors in Japan because Japanese guys go crazy for their suedes and Clydes. And then I even sent it to like a couple employees of the brand, and they're like, I don't know. So I sent pictures to the Puma archives. The guys who actually store and the guys
Yeah.
who are the
Yeah.
curators of everything Puma. And they started looking at it and they kind of sourced it out and they're like, yeah, we're pretty sure what you got is a pair made for Walt Clyde Frazier. So,
That's
it's
crazy.
player's edition. Whether or not I could ever picture match it and say he wore it in a game, who knows? But with it being leather, with it not being the normal suede, um, it's a pair made for Clyde. Just a short history of the Clyde. Uh, in '73, Clyde signed with Puma. All the basketball shoes were leather, and Clyde could not stand the leather shoes. They were uncomfortable. He said, "If this is what I have to wear, you can take your money back. I'm not gonna, I'm not playing in your shoes." So, they took the mold of his foot. They made pairs in suede and switched up a little thing. So original Clydes were suede because that's what he was more comfortable playing in. And it's said that he played in over, I think it's like 390 colorways. It was part of his contract that I'm gonna have a different color every game. Of course, that
Wow.
was almost impossible, hand making pairs for one
Yeah.
player for X amount of games a year. So every now and then he wouldn't be able to wear what they were making for him, and they might just take like a pair in production, and he'd have to wear it. Somewhere along the line, I think this would have been a pair that would have just been in the basic Puma line, but
Yeah.
then they stamped it on, stamped his name on it, made it in his size, and it was kind of one that he had to wear in between, I would say. Um, so the I can't really trace it back further than where I got it, but I
Yeah.
got it from a guy who runs kind of a thrift store, secondhand store in Cleveland, and not very well known history. After Clyde left New York, he went and played for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I guess there's a high chance it could have exchanged hands once or twice, and it could have been Clyde's.
Yeah.
It's believed
That's
by the it's
wild.
believed by the Puma archives that it is. Like I said, it was dirt cheap to me. I've never listed it up for sale, but I've still been offered several $1,000s for it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I can't imagine that one will leave your collection anytime soon.
no, no, I've had
I
some
think
people
money
go, oh, if
matters
I,
at that
yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah. I've had people go, oh, several $1,000s. You got to move that, even a couple hundred more than the normal price. They're like, you got to move that. And I'm like, what am I going to do with $2,000 that I sold a pair of shoes for? I'm going to buy more shoes. So why
Yeah.
not just keep, the centerpiece of the collection here with me? So
Yeah, that's a cool one, man. Wow. I mean, man, it just makes me wonder so much. Yeah, we're gonna have to do another episode and actually go deep on the Clyde story because
sure, yeah,
that is like that's one of my favorite stories, man. Like just to think about how all of that happened because I think that's like this is like something that doesn't happen very frequently in sneakers now because of social media, because of the internet, where you know it makes me think of like I lived in New York, I guess like 12, 13 years ago now. But I used to kind of wander around and go into all the old tennis shops and you just anywhere I could find that might have sneakers because I mean I would do that anywhere. Like this is just kind of the way
yeah.
kind of I just
That's
like
kind of, yeah,
seeking and
been there, done
searching and
that. Like, you're
yeah.
gonna go looking for shoes.
Yeah, and I remember walking into this tiny tennis store in out on Long Island actually, and they had like a discount table in the back corner and like a basement. And there was, this is I'm guessing like 2012 or something. But they had shoes from, they had like LeBron 2s and LeBron 3s, so those shoes are, you know, what, 6, 7, 8 years old at that point, and there was so much more than just that. And I mean, I wish I would have had like, wish I would have been taking pictures and
Extra
thinking about all
suitcase
of that
to carry
stuff.
them
And
home.
yeah, but it was just one of those things where like it just feels like this is like the perfect, your story with that shoe is such a perfect, like, it's priceless, man. It is like, you know, yes, like, I mean, you know, who knows? Shit hits the fan and you've got to get rid of your collection. Then it's great that you have it and you can get rid of
Then
it,
I got
make
one
some money
pair to
back.
make up for all the other
Right.
money I wasted.
Yeah,
But
that's how I feel
yeah,
too about mine. But like, at the end of the day, that story is just so cool because it really kind of exemplifies why I love sneakers is just the chase and the hunt and
right.
like the knowledge that I'm chasing for all of these pairs.
Hmm.
And it seems like that's like I can't imagine a better story, especially when you go to the brand and people are like, we can't quite get this, but like try to figure it out. I'm like, oh well, like
Yeah, yeah.
there's this
They're
small
trying to
window
match the
of
numbers in it. They're
yeah,
trying to, and they're like, it's,
yeah.
it's an
That's a cool
anomaly.
story,
It's
man.
it's its own thing. So
Yep.
yeah,
So how does that fit into the bigger picture of your collection? Like, what are some of your other favorites? Because obviously that one's got to be near the top, if not
yeah,
the top.
yeah. I mean, beyond pairs with Clyde's signature on them and stuff like that as well. Because of course that stuff's going to be important to me, and I have
Yeah,
3 or 4 of those. Beyond that, a lot of my collections that I feel are important historically or whatnot are going to be Clydes. A lot of collectors are only Clydes, only Suedes, and I'm the guy who buys the weird stuff a lot of times. But still, Clydes are important. One of the most important releases to me, and I know we already mentioned MTV, but would be like the first MTV release that they did.
yeah, yep,
So, we didn't have Clyde at all for a few years. And then in '05, they brought Clyde back. They got Clyde signed back, and they, started making Clydes again in '05. So in '06, this is going to be one of the few releases where people were lined up outside sneaker stores to get. And the actual general release pair, if you want to call it that, I mean, it's a Yo MTV Raps
yeah,
collab.
yep,
I think they made, it depends on what article you read. Some articles say only 96. Some people say up to 300. Either way, it's a pretty limited run on the
yeah,
pair that was actually
absolutely.
available. And then the friends and family pair, the green one, they only made
It's
50
crazy.
of. And they say Forever Fresh on them. They're Yo MTV Raps. And when I started really, really collecting the brand, the group of guys that you followed, the group of people that you looked up to, the people that you looked to know what shoes you wanted, their group was called Forever Fresh. So, when I finally started getting into it and could start chasing stuff down, it's the pairs I had to have. To me, it's the most important, or one of the most important Clydes out there, you know, beyond, like a vintage 80s made in Yugoslavia or 70s
Yeah.
Clyde. That's one of the most important. It'd be like that, a couple other early ones. The staple pigeon, of course,
Oh yeah,
with the
that's a
same
beautiful shoe
colorway as
too.
the
Yep.
dunk, produced shortly after. Certain ones like that definitely to me are historical and important. And when you first get into it, you're just buying colorways, you're just buying stuff that you think looks cool. But then once you get to know the history and the history of the releases and the stories that the collabs tell, that becomes important, throughout the years.
Yeah, totally, man. I think what was the Puma, when did that staple Puma come out?
Don't catch me lying to you. I want to say 13.
Yeah, 13. Okay, that makes sense cuz
It's got to be
that
around there. I'm over here, trying to stare at the tag, but it's
that's the year they also did the Blaze of Glory that year, right? I feel like it's about the
the
same time.
Blaze of Glory came out a few years later,
Was
and
it?
that
Okay.
Blaze, yeah, it actually came out a few years later, but that was a big pair as well. I got it over
Well,
there
there was a
somewhere,
black version of the
but
staple one that
yeah,
came out a couple years later too, right? So that was the first of the
yeah,
staple kind of like four or
yeah.
five
Now Staples
collabs
kind
over the
of
years. Yeah,
you know, he did these couple pairs. They were really huge.
yeah,
He went away. Didn't go away. He never went away. He's staple, but he went away from
yeah,
Puma for a while, and now he's kind of like a perennial. Does collabs with state with Puma every year. Some of them
yeah.
better than others, but I mean, he's still Jeff
Yep,
Staple. He's still like one of the best that's ever done it. The guy that
yep.
caused riots. The guy that started the term sneakerhead. Like he is who he is, and you have to respect it. So
Yeah, totally,
yeah.
man, totally. Well, so outside of obviously following your 30 Days of Puma Love on Instagram, my last question is, how can people get more knowledge? How can they learn more about Puma? I feel like you could teach a TED talk on Puma. I mean, I feel like I'm learning stuff from you, and I've seen a lot of what you've posted over the years. So what other ways can people find more about the brand outside of going to the brand directly?
Um, it's kind of tough these days. There's not a lot of places. Back in the day, back when Nike Talk was big, there was a Puma Talk. There was that. Back when Crooked Tongues was going on, there was a lot of Puma hype going on in the Crooked Tongues chat. But these days, follow We Are Puma. Uh, even though We Are Puma is really only active during 30 Days of Puma Love, I might have to talk to the person who is in charge of that. But but yeah, follow We Are Puma, follow the hashtags, the We Are Puma, the 30 Days of Puma Love, and just hit up the people who are posting the shoes. I haven't met a single person in the community that's not personable, that doesn't love sharing. So you see something that you like, just hit up the person. Whether it be in a comment or a direct message, and be like, "Hey, what's this? Can you tell me more about this?" I get messages on the daily now of just strangers, people from all over the world. Can you tell me about this? Can you identify this? I get that kind of stuff every day and I answer every single one. Sometimes it's almost exhausting because it's like, isn't there anybody else who can tell you about Puma? But if you have questions,
Right?
I'll
Yeah.
I'll answer it. If I don't know it, I'll research it until I do know it. Like some people think I'm crazy knowledgeable. A lot of times just because I'll hit the Google button, and sometimes it's about how you Google it. If you've seen an article 2 years ago, you kind of got to remember how you got to that article so you can find it again.
Yeah. Yep.
A lot of your articles, even I'll source back to them years later. So if I can't remember, how many pairs was in this release or when this came out or what was the story behind this. But yeah, just hit up the people who are posting them. Ask them about them. A lot of the stuff you may see may not be still being sold, but they can point you in the right direction. They can point you to something similar. So definitely just get out there, talk to a Puma head, and celebrate 30 days of Puma love with us.
Right on, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about it. I mean, I look forward to it every year. I feel like, I said this before we started recording, but like ultimately my goal with sneaker history is always to like diversify everything about sneakers and get
Right.
people to understand all the different nuances and the backgrounds that we all come from, the people that are all a part of like making these shoes. And, this is a really important kind of piece to the bigger picture puzzle that I think people could really like jump in and like experience some new stuff and learn some new things. So I appreciate you coming on, and
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me and putting
of
the
course,
word out
man.
there.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to get you back on. We'll do a
Yeah.
little bit more of a deep dive into the suede and the Clyde stuff because like that stuff is super fascinating to me
Yeah,
as
I'll
well.
just
But
destroy the history they want you to know. So,
yeah, yeah, exactly. I That's how it works for all these brands, man. Like you
right.
see the Jordan 1 band, shoe. It's like, okay, yeah. But anyway, we'll get into that on
We'll get
another
into the
episode.
stories behind the
Yep.
stories.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But and yeah, once again, let everybody know how they can find you personally on Instagram as well.
Yeah, I'm primarily on Instagram. Some of the other social media pages I may lurk, but I'm not doing anything. But on Instagram, just.in, my name, Justin, dot Puma. Go ahead and follow me. Follow We Are Puma as well. At least during this month, if someone's tagging 30 Days of Puma Love, I'll be putting their picture up at least on the story. So, follow those two pages, say hello. If you have a pair of Pumas, post them up.
Cool, man. All right, well, glad to have you on, and thanks everybody for listening and tuning in. Make sure you hit subscribe, connect with Justin, make sure you support, and find somebody to ask some questions about Puma about this month. Thanks for rocking with us. We'll catch you in the next episode. Peace.
Appreciate it.